All right. Well, thank you guys. As we're getting the firesides going here, I wanted to kind of echo Casey's point earlier. There is a lot of expertise out in the exhibitor hall. There's a lot of expertise in here. So, lean on your partners as you're expanding internationally. And there's probably two partners here that we've been leaning on for a long time. Matt's coming up with David. Matt's been with Global E forever and has been just a huge supporter of GELF. The ESW team will be up after that, and actually met Martine for the first time, and he's going to have a client up here. So again, we can't do what we do without the help of folks like Matt. So Matt, I won't tell him any stories or secrets, but I think Matt and I have shared the stage more than just about anyone at the Global E-commerce Leaders Forum. So I'm going to turn it over to you, David. Welcome, and thanks again, guys.
All right. I appreciate everyone's time, engagement. Just as way of introduction, Matt Merrilees, CEO for North America, overseeing the Global E activities here in the region. And David.
Hi, nice to meet everyone. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Luisa, online first jewelry brand.
Very good. And I think what we're looking to do today is tell the story of Luisa, right? And I'll give you a brief introduction and spend hopefully no more than 5 minutes on Global E. But when you look at the business as a whole, Global E's been in existence now for, we had our recent 10-year anniversary, business operating out of multiple regions throughout the world, helping brands cross borders and break down barriers in order to do so in a highly scalable and profitable way. When you look at the business, we are a publicly traded company. We've done quite a bit in and since our existence, in addition to launching an exclusive partnership with Shopify, helping power their overall platform cross-border capabilities, which has been super successful to date as we run it as a part of the business, and of course supporting brands all over the world in many different platform strategies. So we're going to start just sharing a bit of data, which I think is hopefully going to be able to lean in and share and drive some insights into the international strategies that you have within your businesses. And I think one of the things that we did want to start with is 23 macro trends. I think when we saw in 22, we did see some heavy headwinds, right? COVID was one, we saw inflation was two, we saw the war in Ukraine was three. And I think what we ended up, seeing this year is headwinds that have been far less than what we realized in 22. Although they're still there, although profitability, although that discussion has not gone away, we are seeing more positive outlook for 23 and the rest of year than we have seen in last year's kind of setup. So what we do is we sit on a significant amount of data, over 20 million transactions through the platform, and then what we do, spread that out across over 1,000 brands on a global scale. We look at what the overall trends from a market dynamic perspective is, right? So feeding in and seeing the performance, running out first half of 23 versus first half of 22. What we do is we look at every brand that transacts through the Global E platform, and then we produce data. And then obviously, and David will share the story on Luisa, but help give our merchant partners overall insights as you start to invest, where to invest, what are the markets right now across your peers that are doing well. But I think the highlight here and the star as we see it, and I know it's been a theme for the overall conference as well, is Europe, is EMEA. I think we're seeing a heavy rebound this year. I think it's a market right now, U.S. outbound, that is thriving. And I think it is one that we've seen quite a significant uptick when we compare 22 versus 21, which was a complete opposite story as a business. And also Middle East. Middle East is a market that hasn't stopped thriving, right? Driven by some markets and countries that I'll get into next. But when we look at the full landscape, right? And this is really a view of brands and peers that are existing in the market today that likely are similar to yourself. We look at it on a market-specific level, right? I think when you look at Mexico as one of the shining stars today, I mean, it is one that 100% of merchants on the Global E platform are seeing growth in Mexico, and as a whole, we are seeing a 60% growth across the entire platform. So just gives you some country-level insights and data as to what our brands are seeing across the spectrum as you start to think about building out these cross-border strategies for your business. All right, and then I think when you look at, and we'll get into David's story here in 1 minute, and when you look at the journey of what we're seeing right now, I can't tell you enough. I don't step out of a meeting or into a meeting where there's not a conversation around profitability, right? How do I drive and how do I get more efficient in the way that I'm operating today, right? I know there's going to be a lot of discussions on how this operates, but we see it in 4 quadrants, right? And in the top left, what you're seeing here is one centralized warehouse supporting the entire world in your pure B2C model, right? How do I do it? How do I do it efficiently? How do I do it in a localized way? And then what we started to see is really with some more of our global partners that we currently support today is how do I leverage inventory that's positioned in these markets yet not have to have a digital following in that market because I want the duty and tax advantages. I want the benefits of keeping inventory in market. I want to be able to serve it domestically, but I don't want to set up a local site because it may run me, call it an average of 10% GMV, which I just don't want to be able to build, maintain, manage 2 inventories, dead inventory, all of the complexities of what you have. So I'd say these are, kind of the most common. And then I think when you look at the bottom right, we've got brands today in market that are leveraging inventory in multiple geos throughout the world in a single cart, right? How do I leverage inventory that exists in Europe to serve Europe, but then backfill that inventory from the US where it may not exist so that my customer has the full catalog offering of what's available to them, yet you're not minimizing that digital following and having that overhead cost and spend on your books. So this is a landscape. I think, David, as you get in your story here, I think it's one that, I'd love to listen in on and jump in on, but it's been an exciting venture and glad to hear it.
Yes, absolutely. So I can tell you a little bit more about Luisa. At first, it's still a fairly young venture. We launched the company in 2018 with my co-founder. And the idea behind the brand was very, very simple. I worked for a few years for a lot of different luxury brands in Europe and in the US after that, and I noticed a lot of opacity in the production process, in the distribution also, and in the margins, and that was the idea at the time, launching a direct-to-consumer first, online first brand. And what we did a little bit differently than a lot of other brands at the very beginning is that we invested heavily into our own internal marketing teams to build an internal influencer marketing software. And what this did for the brand is that we generated over 40 to 50% of our traffic coming from outside of the US while the company was based in Brooklyn. And so very early on, international for us. And at the same time, the company was also, skyrocketing on the first 3 years. And so we had to manage what do we want to do with our international customers? And at that time, I would say investors and other brands were not that eager to accelerate on international. I think now things have changed, and in the current economic environment, I think not many brands can oversee the revenues from international visitors. But for us, from the beginning, it was how can we offer pretty much the same experience in the US and outside of the US. And so very quickly, international for us generated around 30% of our revenue month over month. And what was also very interesting for us is that we are an online business. We look a lot at our repeat cohorts. How do people behave over time? Do they come back to the website? And what we noticed is that by investing on the international visitors very early on, our repeat cohorts internationally were very similar to our repeat cohorts in the US, which means that the experience for them was very similar, pretty seamless. And that was new to me because for years before that, as an international customer, it was always such a pain to order online from a different country. And so we'd really try our best by implementing globally, I think within 1 year of launch of the business, which is fairly young, to offer that very, very seamless online experience.
And I'm curious, right, because not every client that we work with starts off with that heavy of an international following. What did you see prior to Globally, the success that allowed you to build that up?
Prior to Globally, we would ship everything from Shopify ourselves, and we would freak out because we would see orders from like Japan, from Spain, from all over the world on our little brand new e-commerce. And at first we tried to do it in-house, but duties and taxes were a nightmare for us to handle. So we decided to switch to Globally. I think it was 2019. Very early on. And the brand basically grew and scaled international through Globally since day one. And I would say what's interesting with influencers, and I'm sure it's the same for most brands, even if you are strictly focusing on American influencers, for example, their audience is not American. Their audience is going to be at best 50, 60, 70% American, but you're still going to reach so many different consumers all over the world and influential customers all over the world. So for us, there was no question about like, should we invest into international or not? Should we wait for international? We just did it from the very beginning. And to this day, yeah, we ship 30% of our orders internationally. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm curious also because we always see a bunch of different strategies, depending on the brand, depending on the retailer, depending on where you're at in your international journey. But you went full board into every single country. I'm just curious about that approach versus, you know, some that have very surgical approaches into, you know, studying and analyzing and translating and even having, you know, that approach. I'm curious on the strategy because we see both, to be honest, and I'm just curious why.
Yeah, maybe it's more a startup approach of like whatever works and go for it. We didn't really think twice about it because for us, launching 1 or 200 countries was the same amount of work. Once you have a platform, like a cross-border platform like Globally, you don't care of duty and taxes, you don't care of shipping labels, you don't care of anything. You're just, if an order comes into your online Shopify, you just process it and ship it. So for us, outside of like very specific regions like Russia or India that have like very specific restrictions on duties, for us it was a no-brainer, and we did it because our traffic was so widespread internationally. We had to be where our customers were.
Okay. Yeah. Very good. And I think when we look at the experience, right? I mean, you know, talk us through some of the currency strategies. I mean, obviously, you know, we have a heavy hand in that, but of course, it's your business, it's your brand. We're signing off on everything that we do. And I think even as we look at one of the early adopters in our native Shopify product that we launched, you know, a few years ago, you know, this was one element where, you know, it was a drive to say we want everything in the Shopify platform. We want it embedded in the system and the setup, and obviously you jumped on early. So currency strategy, I'm curious as you're thinking through this, as you're building in margin, as we're going through the strategy, how and what your view is.
So we can start with pricing because at first, when you're selling internationally for the first few years, you have no idea what is the right price for each region. At least it was our scenario. And very quickly, we understood that we could be very aggressive on some regions of the world, such as in Asia, several countries like Japan, South Korea, Singapore, Hong Kong. We saw amazing tractions in those markets, and we noticed that as we increased our prices year over year, the traction was still the same. And so we quickly understood that by using a platform like Globally in the back end, we could really be more aggressive on the prices in areas that have the purchasing power, the spending power that it takes. And quite on the opposite, we also noticed that several regions were very, very sensitive to the free shipping threshold, for example. And these were also things we had to test over the years. It took us quite some time to really understand what is actually triggering a higher conversion rate. And we can debate this with things such as translations and other topics. But yeah, I would say it was very important for us to control pricing per region. And sometimes at the country level, we would go down to the country level. We don't have any wholesale, so for us, it's really our online store is the face of the company. So it was maybe an easier discussion than for bigger companies that have to meet the goals and the requirements of wholesalers. But yeah, so basically playing in so many different currencies from the get-go was a huge plus. When we compare the conversion before that with prices displayed in USDs, in Europe they don't like it. Honestly, the USD was not an option, and so yeah.
No, definitely. And I think even as you look at the pricing strategy, critically important because it's one that it's eye-opening for every brand that we do operate with out of the gate to say, hey, there's a 20% VAT into UK. You know, there's a statistical distribution of how you look at products that cross a threshold where duty actually applies to your business and where it doesn't, right? And I think when you start to build that out, it's very much scary for a brand just starting their journey in international to be able to say, mark my prices up by 32% or 25% or whatever the case may be for your business, and you think people are still going to buy? And the answer is yes. And I think it comes with a communication strategy on the front end, starting from when the shopper hits the site and not just making sure that you're, you know, surprising a customer with a new price strategy without reinforcing what it means to him or her throughout the journey. All right. And then I guess the experience, because this has shifted. I think when you look at, you know, globally, obviously we support every platform that's out there today, and it's a platform agnostic strategy. But with Shopify specifically, you know, obviously we've embedded those capabilities into their existing checkout. So I know that's important as you're building out the website, the experience, running scripts, doing discounts, doing promotions, running price management through the server. I mean, there's a lot of things that come into play here that you pushed us to enjoy. But curious on, you know, on your take.
So if we start with the checkout, and I mean, for me there were two globally experiences. There was the prior one, which was the globally checkout, and now that you have integrated with Shopify, we were one of, I think Netflix was number one. We were number two to roll out that new checkout, which is a native Shopify checkout. So consumers all around the world cannot see the difference if they are processing payment with Shopify or with Globally. And for us, it was a big step up in the experience for our international customers. It was the last missing piece for our international visitors to have exactly the same experience as US ones. And for me, that was the goal since the very beginning of integrating with a cross-border platform. And the idea is that we can now explain very clearly in the checkout what's going on, what they are going to pay, what they're not going to pay. And we have very few customer experiences, interactions around those topics at this point. I think people are getting so used to the Shopify checkout anyway that when they see it for international, they just seamlessly go through it.
And I'm glad to see them going to a single page, which is something that Globally has seen a lot of success with over the years. So I think when you look at this, I agree. I think one of the other things that you do extremely well on the site, I mean, is when you're building out the strategy right now based on value, based on shipping service, being transparent, getting credit for offering free shipping throughout the overall journey is something that you, I think, have done a very nice job with. And I think when you look at the proposition, the UK versus Germany, I mean, it varies, right? And you're seeing those nuances, especially being and having been in.
Yes, and that's what people see in the back end. We also have a lot of, I think, crucial and strategic decisions around what are the carriers we want to offer in the back end to offer free shipping, for example, or how aggressive can we be on express shipping versus standard shipping. And so the customer doesn't really see these things, and each country has a completely different structure in the back end. But it's, for us as a brand, at least, it's a very seamless thing to manage. Once we decide on the carriers we want to offer per country, we can just change our free shipping thresholds, and offer basically the best offer. Yeah.
Very good. And I think some of the things that a lot of folks, as you begin that journey in international, whether you're advancing that journey in international, there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes of just showing what is local to an international shopper, right? And I think when you look at payment acquiring, it's one of them, right? So when you look at payment acquiring and the ability to build out local acquiring, in each and every single market is key. To having more of a successful transaction percentage of orders that are coming to your platform because we're locally acquiring those transactions with a local bank in a local market. So those are the little nuances that, for example, if it happens to fail with a current PSP, then a multi-PSP network being less reliable on one single partner is key to help brands be able to push through those international transactions, right? So when we have a failed order, we can retry those orders off of multiple PSPs, and no different with fraud, right? We know there's a lot of amazing fraud providers out there that leverage automated fraud, AI services today. But then when you understand that, hey, there's a failed transaction, what do you do with that transaction? How are you looking to save that transaction? And how are you making it to leverage the platform and the scale benefits of what we've learned to be able to benefit Intn'l, Luisa, and others? So important for sure. And I think as we went down the journey, I mean, I think we've spoken quite a bit on this, but you also had a play of moving into Europe, right? And I'm curious because there's always the conversation from brands as we go down the path of what time and what scale does it make sense for me to start putting inventory into a local market. And I think your story is an interesting one because I see this conversation happening often. Is it profitable for me? Is it not? Is the catalog robust enough? Is it not? And I'm just curious from your story on what you've seen.
Yes, I think we can even skip maybe this slide. And so, yes, I would say 3 to 4 years into the business, we decided to offer a fully localized experience for our European customers by opening our own warehouse in Germany. Well, up until now, we shipped everything from the US to the rest of the world. And so it was last year that we opened our operations there, which means fully translated, fully localized. We opened a separate Shopify entity. We had to duplicate all of our backend on the CRM front, on the CDP front. I mean, it was a huge lift for our teams because we wanted to offer a fully localized experience. And what we noticed is that performance was not necessarily there by translating or by replicating the website in French or in German. And so a year into the process, we decided to actually go completely backward, bring everything back to the US, and start fulfilling the rest of the world from the US again. And what we've seen recently is that Performances are even better since we've done that. The website is only in English now for all of Europe, but people don't really mind in Europe. I think they are pretty used to it at this point. And I think one of the few things we didn't see at the time was the lift that localization would represent on our teams, the toll on our team to have 2 or 3 different websites instead of 1 at this point, to create all of your assets, all of your social media content, all of your CRM, was a huge leap for us, and in the end, not justified. It was justified profitability-wise in terms of shipping cost, but pretty much everything else became much more expensive for us. So, and I think we're not the only one brand at the moment doing that move, but we decided to bring back our inventory, offer a much wider range of products from our US 3PL than a restricted assortment in Europe, and performance went up for us. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think this is, I mean, it's a good slide. It's a busy one, but it is also one that, you know, as you do this, and I'm not saying it's the right strategy, the wrong strategy. Obviously, every business has its own demands, its needs, and we need to be able to help enable it. But it is the same experience, whether you're in market or whether you're not, that those shoppers within those countries expect, right? So if you're not adhering to that, if you're not speaking to them in a local way, then you're going to see abandonment. You're going to see, you know, all of the money spent on driving customer acquisition to your site go away. And obviously, I know, you know, it's been exciting to see, because I think that's always the conversation I see often with brands is, if I am going to enter a market, what's the right time? And I can tell you, I've got some brands that are doing, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars a year right now in sales that serve it from a single warehouse in the U.S. I've got brands right now that are doing that same amount of volume through the platform right now that are penetrated in multiple regions throughout the world that are leveraging inventory. So I'm not saying there's a right fit from what I see. In my view, I think every brand has their own journey. Every brand has their own strategy, but a lot of the digital native brands similar to Ana Luisa, I think, have taken a similar approach. You know, how can I drive growth through marketing, through performance marketing, and how can I scale a business at a rapid pace? And then I think when we look at, you know, the overall, and we spoke a bit about the management of it, yes, you brought it back. Yes, we've enabled it. I think the catalog, to me, hearing your story on that was a big one. I mean, how did you see that difference from a catalog perspective on the way that you approach the in-market versus US pullback?
Yeah, I think we were quite naive. We thought that offering, let's say, half to 2/3 of our assortment in Europe would be enough to convert consumers in the same way. And it was not the case. I think, at least in our business, diversity of products is super important for our consumers. And that's why the second we brought our inventory back and switched back to the US website for Europe, conversion actually went up. Yeah. Even though the website was now in English, there was no more French, no more German available on the website, English emails all the way through. I think having a bigger assortment made the biggest impact on the sales.
Very good. And I know it's a debate, and I know we've got a close-knit group of brands that talk vocally and often amongst each other, but translations, and I know there's probably more sessions coming on this, but curious your view, because I know we sat in a room and I heard, and it was actually, from my perspective, very fun to watch, but brands going back and forth on, is translations worth it? Is it something that I'm going to see a lift on? Is it something that I'm going to see a return on? Should I invest in it? Where should I invest in it? Should I do it before I even launch a market? So I'm curious your view. I can share what, you know, I learned from the brands, but what's your take?
I mean, very early on, we launched the entire world in English, and things went very fast for us that way. And then we decided to go the extra mile in Europe. And Europe was already performing pretty well for us. France, Germany were very strong markets for us. But we decided to go the extra step, build a full process to translate all of our content for like emails, for like product page, et cetera, et cetera. But I really came back from that perspective with the experience we had. I also spoke with a lot of other brands, sometimes much bigger or smaller than us, who are sometimes wondering, should I translate before launching a market? And I feel if you cannot perform in English these days in a market, I don't think you're going to perform that much better if you translate your website, to be honest. So I wouldn't wait until translation is done to launch any market. France is not famous for its English-speaking skills, and still today the website converts extremely well in English in France. I don't think consumers are that picky anymore when it comes to an add to cart. I mean, you can still translate like essential items on your website, obviously, but a lot of the smaller contextual copy doesn't have to be translated, in my opinion. From what I heard also from other brands, is that if you are running ads and online marketing in other markets, you should translate the content of those ads. Yeah. But sending to an American or English-speaking website is not that much of an issue. And I've heard so many direct-to-consumer, very fast-growing brands around me doing the same thing, that I'm pretty convinced at this point that it's a nice to have, but it's definitely not a must-have in my opinion.
Okay. No, and it's we laugh because we sat through a session where we did see some of our brand community arguing about this point, and I think the one eye-opening thing for me is there are some that were super mature in that approach, right? That without a doubt wouldn't launch a market with it, and it works for them. But I think there was also the extreme of another digitally native brand that sat in that room that basically said Google's doing it for free and challenged that company, said why go ahead and invest in it? So I know there's more sessions on it. I don't want to take us off into a tangent, but I think what's been amazing to see just from when we started working together and seeing the growth within each of the regions. I mean, international continues to remain a focus, right? Even through the macro headwinds and everything that you've seen, and it's been a hell of a success story, to be honest.
Yeah, absolutely, and we still see such a strong organic traction when it comes to international customers and regions. Over the years, obviously, English-speaking countries are going to be very quickly your top markets. But it's interesting to see that in some more niche regions, such as Japan, Hong Kong, Western Europe is the same. You see very high loyalty from your customers over the years, and that's why we kept investing on all of these markets through influencer marketing, through other marketing channels as well, and very happy. Yeah, very happy.
Very cool. No, and I think that's also, as we continue to look at, usually the question is, great, year one is a huge success, right? But what do we do next? How do we continue to grow? How do we keep it top of mind? What do I do to get to the next level after I've created the localized experiences? And it's good to see that you continue to do that. So that is what we had for today.
Great. Well, thank you both, very much. Fantastic to hear the Ana Luisa story, and those numbers are staggering. They really are. So congratulations on that, and continued success. Any brief questions, from the audience before? Yes.
How dramatic was the difference in margin across those different localized pricing choices?
So I can give you, the approach out of the box that we take with all of our customers is we build out what we call a market strategy, right? And that market strategy is a deep dive into every single international market to understand, number one, where are your focus markets? Number two, where do we create regional approaches where, we want to build a bit more of a long tail group, but do it in a sophisticated way so that it may be a Euro region, an APAC region, or a rest of world region for that matter, right? But it starts with building out and looking at your current in-market strategy, right? Do you currently have stores? Do you have sell-through? Do you have distribution? Do you have competition? How do we analyze that as a starting point, right? And then if, let's just say, in Ana Luisa's case, you have full flexibility to price however you want, then you're essentially taking what it is a statistical distribution, right? You look at the overall market, and I mentioned the UK earlier, 20% VAT, depending on the product, maybe another, call it 12% duty. But when you look at the history of what you currently performed at, you realize that only 70% of orders actually, or 70% of orders fell below the duty threshold, which is 135 pounds into the UK. So why uplift my prices to try to create a margin that might actually impact your overall growth, scale, and profitability? So it's statistical distance. I can't say that 3 times fast, but it's a distribution of the stats to be able to make sure that we build out a model that is managing on the country level a retained margin that you as a brand want to achieve, right? So I don't think that margin strategy is similar across every single brand. I think it changes by vertical. I think it changes by brand. I think it changes if you're a retailer selling other brands that you have less margin. So it really starts with what is your margin goal, and then we build a model to get there, and then we manage that model on an ongoing basis.
To give you just some numbers for us, our prices would range from same price as in the US to plus 25-30% on Global E. Because our approach is very conservative, the preserved or protected margin that we wanted was to have the same internationally and internationally. So that's a stake. Profitability for us since the beginning was very important, and that's how also we were profitable on those markets from the beginning. So, and I know other brands are not going to be as aggressive on the price point, but I was very surprised personally of the positive reaction of international visitors despite the price increase. They understand there are duties, they understand there is free shipping for receiving their package on the other side of the world. So in the end, the plus 25, plus 30% is not, at least in our price points, not that shocking for them.
And then on that, there's even some little things that you can do, right? Rounding prices. What is the local rounding convention in a local market? How can I build in margin, which gives you back 1 to 2 percentage points on a typical market prop, where we feed it right back to the brand. So that this way you offer free shipping, but you're not funding it in that capacity, and make sure that you keep the margin target where it needs to be. Otherwise, brands get very upset.
And we do certainly love, to hear sort of the pricing and kind of profitability focus. Certainly that's part of our theme today here, is profitably scaling, customer engagement, globally. So again, really want to thank, both of you. David, fantastic, with the Ana Luisa story. Thank you so much. And I'll ask our next speakers to come up, please.